More than 1,200 years ago, a storm rose out of the north. It was not made of wind and waves, but of men. Fierce, scarred, and unyielding, they came from the frozen coasts of Scandinavia, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Lands of jagged mountains, endless forests, and bitter seas. These were the Vikings.
History is not just the past. It is the greatest story ever told. From the rise of mighty empires to their fiery collapse, history has shaped the world in ways that continue to amaze us. From warriors who carved kingdoms to revolutions that changed the course of civilization, every moment holds a story worth remembering. From ancient wonders like the Great Wall and Da Vinci's timeless sketches, to humanity reaching for the stars with the Apollo 11 mission, the journey of mankind is nothing short of extraordinary. This channel brings history to life through fast-paced stories, cinematic storytelling, and epic journeys across time. We explore battles, betrayals, inventions, and legends, the defining moments that shaped who we are today. If you have ever wanted to see history as if you were truly there, you have found the right place. Step into the past, relive the greatest stories ever lived, and join our journey through time. Subscribe now.
They were explorers, raiders, and settlers who, between the 8th and 11th centuries, reshaped the map of Europe and far beyond. They burst into history with such fury that terrified monks wrote of demons descending from the ocean. To some, they were savages. To others, they were cunning traders and master shipbuilders who carried with them not only axes, but also ideas, languages, and stories. Their legacy was carved in blood and fire, but also in art, law, and exploration. They raided churches, yes, but they also founded towns, built kingdoms, and even crossed the Atlantic Ocean long before Columbus. The Viking Age was more than war. It was an era of cultural exchange, of courage, ambition, and change that altered Europe forever. But to understand why these people took to the seas, why they risked their lives in fragile ships to sail into the unknown, we must begin in the cold heart of their homeland. Life in Scandinavia was brutal. The soil was thin and rocky, the growing season short, and winter always near. Families clung to survival on small farms where harvests were uncertain and hunger a constant shadow. Villages were isolated, bound together by ties of kinship and loyalty, but divided by rivalry and the hunger for land. The Norse people were farmers, herdsmen, hunters, and fishermen. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, and they sold barley, rye, and oats. Their lives followed the rhythms of the seasons, plowing in spring, harvesting in autumn, and enduring the snowbound months with only their stored food, their animals, and their gods. Yet peace rarely lasted. Clans clashed, neighbors fought, and blood feuds ran through generations. A king in those days was little more than a warlord with enough warriors at his side to demand obedience. The world of the Vikings was one of constant struggle, but hardship breeds ambition. The land could not feed all, and young men hungered for more wealth, more land, more glory. As the population grew, pressure mounted, and some began to look outward. Beyond the fjords and forests, there were richer fields, softer people, and treasures waiting across the sea. It was here, in this crucible of survival, that the Viking Age was born. And at the heart of it all was a vessel unlike any the world had ever seen, the longship. The longship was more than wood and sail. It was the beating heart of Viking ambition, the tool that transformed farmers into conquerors and exiles into explorers. Sleek, flexible, and built for speed, it could slice across open seas and skim shallow rivers alike. With a shallow draft of only a few feet, these ships could be rowed inland, far from the coast where no other vessel dared to go. They were light enough to be hauled across land, yet strong enough to cross the dangerous waters of the North Atlantic. The prow was often carved into the shape of a dragon or serpent, its snarling head meant to terrify enemies and ward off spirits. When the sun glinted on their oars and the wind filled their sails, these ships moved with a swiftness that no European vessel could match. With the longship, the Vikings no longer needed to fight only their neighbors. They could reach new lands, test new waters, and carry their battles to distant shores. And in the year 793, the world beyond Scandinavia first felt the bite of their steel. The target was a small island off the northeast coast of England, home to a Christian monastery called Lindisfarne. For generations, monks had lived there in quiet devotion, copying manuscripts and tending to holy relics. But their prayers could not shield them from the sea. That summer, the horizon darkened with sails. When the Vikings landed, they brought no mercy. They stormed the monastery, cut down the unarmed, and carried off gold, silver, and slaves. The attack sent shockwaves across Europe. To the Anglo-Saxons, it seemed as if devils had risen from the waves to punish the faithful. Chroniclers wrote that heathen men miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter. The age of Viking raids had begun, and it was only the beginning. Word of the wealth of monasteries and towns spread quickly back to Scandinavia. Gold crosses, silver chalices, jeweled reliquaries, all treasures of the church, were irresistible to men who had grown up in lands where even iron was scarce. Within a generation, Viking ships prowled the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and France. They struck swiftly, burned what they could not carry, and vanished back into the sea before resistance could arrive. Yet they were not mindless marauders. Each raid required skill, organization, and courage. They chose their targets carefully: monasteries, river towns, and trading ports, places rich in wealth but weak in defense. Their terror was their weapon. A village that resisted might be destroyed, but one that surrendered quickly might be spared. Always, though, stripped of its riches. Europe soon learned to fear the dragon-prowed ships, for they could appear anywhere at any time. And the Vikings, emboldened by success, began to dream of more than plunder. They began to dream of power.
The raids did not stop at lonely monasteries. They grew larger, bolder, and more organized. By the mid-9th century, Viking fleets numbering dozens, even hundreds of ships, sailed up the great rivers of Europe: the Seine, the Loire, the Rhine. Towns that once believed themselves safe far inland suddenly faced fire and steel. Paris, the jewel of the Frankish kingdom, was struck more than once. In 845, a fleet led by the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, half man, half myth, sailed up the Seine with 120 ships. The walls of Paris trembled as the Norsemen demanded tribute. Unable to defeat them, King Charles the Bald paid them in silver to leave. It was a ransom so vast that it encouraged more attacks. If the mighty Franks could be forced to buy peace, what chance did smaller kingdoms have? The Vikings were masters of mobility. They struck swiftly, looted, and vanished before armies could gather. And their enemies faced a dilemma: fight them and risk slaughter, or pay them and grow weaker. Many rulers chose silver over blood, enriching the invaders and feeding their hunger for more. But the raids were not only about treasure. Some Vikings came seeking land. Scandinavia's rocky soil could not support a growing population, and the lush fields of England, Ireland, and northern France offered something far more valuable than gold: fertile earth. Viking camps turned into settlements, and settlements grew into towns. York in England, Dublin in Ireland, Rouen in France, all bore the mark of the Norsemen. Europe began to change. Kingdoms learned to fortify their towns, to build stronger defenses, to guard their rivers.
But just as quickly, the Vikings adapted. They did not merely raid, they traded. They forged alliances, married into royal families, and sometimes served as mercenaries. In the east, they followed the rivers into Russia, founding trade routes that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Their journeys led them to the gates of Constantinople, the richest city in the world, where some served as mercenaries in the Byzantine emperor's feared Varangian Guard. Wherever they went, the Vikings adapted. They blended with the local people, adopted new religions, and forged new identities. What began as raids had become something far greater, a Viking diaspora, stretching from Greenland in the west to the glittering palaces of Byzantium in the east. But still, the spirit of exploration drove them further, beyond the known edges of the world itself. For the Vikings, the sea was not a barrier, it was a highway. And when the coasts of Europe were no longer enough, they set their sails towards the unknown. In the late 9th century, settlers from Norway crossed the stormy North Atlantic and reached Iceland, a land of volcanoes, glaciers, and endless horizons. What began as scattered farms grew into a thriving Norse colony. Here the Vikings built a society with its own assembly, the Althing, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. But still they pushed further. Around the year 985, Erik the Red, exiled for murder, sailed west from Iceland. He found a vast new land of icy fjords and green summer meadows. He called it Greenland, hoping the name would lure others to follow. And they did. For centuries, Norse settlers clung to life on that harsh frontier, raising cattle, building churches, and trading with Europe.
Yet even Greenland was not the end. Tales spread of lands further west, lands rich with timber, game, and wild grapes. Around the year 1000, Erik's son Leif Erikson set sail into the unknown. What he found was a place unlike any other: rocky shores, deep forests, and rivers alive with salmon. The Norse called it Vinland. Today, we know it as North America. Long before Columbus, Viking feet had touched the shores of the New World. For a time, they built small camps there, proof of their unrelenting drive to explore. But Vinland was too far, too difficult to hold, and the Norse settlements did not last. Still, the discovery stands as one of their greatest achievements, showing just how far their longships and their courage could carry them. From Scandinavia to North America, from the rivers of Russia to the heart of France, the Vikings had stretched their world across half the globe. But time, like the tide, would eventually turn against them. By the 11th century, the tide that had once carried the Vikings across the seas began to turn. The age of raiders and conquerors was fading, and a new Europe was rising to meet them. One by one, the kingdoms that had once trembled learned to resist. In England, King Alfred the Great and his successors built fortified towns, known as burhs, and organized armies that could strike back quickly. France, battered by raids for generations, grew stronger under rulers who learned that buying peace was not enough. Castles rose along rivers and coasts, stone guardians against the dragon-proud ships. At the same time, the Vikings themselves were changing. Many who had once worshipped Odin and Thor turned to the cross of Christianity. Missionaries spread across Scandinavia, and by the 11th century, kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, later Saint Olaf, were uniting Norway under the Christian faith. With new beliefs came new laws, new alliances, and new ways of life. The old gods and the old raids slowly lost their place. The world was shifting. Trade became more valuable than plunder. A Viking could earn more silver by selling furs, iron, and slaves than by burning a monastery. Settlements turned into stable kingdoms, and the children of raiders grew up as farmers, traders, and Christian kings. The last great Viking invasion came in 1066, when Harald Hardrada of Norway sailed to claim the throne of England. His army clashed with the Anglo-Saxons at Stamford Bridge in a battle so fierce it was said the river ran red with blood. Harold was killed, and with him died the dream of a Viking empire in England. Only weeks later, another invasion would change history forever. Not from the Vikings of the north, but from the Normans of France, descendants of Vikings who had settled and become something new. The Viking Age was over. Yet it never truly ended. Their blood ran in the veins of kings and conquerors. Their words lived on in the languages of Europe. Their ships, their stories, and their spirit of exploration left a legacy that stretched far beyond the north. From raiders to rulers, from exiles to explorers, the Vikings carved their mark upon the world. And though their age has passed, their legend sails on. The Viking Age was more than an era of raids and battles. It was a time when a small, rugged people from the edge of Europe reached out and reshaped the world. They came with fire and steel, yes, but also with trade, ideas, and the courage to sail where no one else dared. From the monasteries of Lindisfarne to the streets of Paris, from the markets of Dublin to the icy shores of Greenland, their influence spread far and wide. They gave birth to kingdoms, carved out new societies, and left behind stories that still stir the imagination 1,000 years later. The Viking Age ended, but its spirit never died. It lives in the words we speak, the nations they helped form, and the enduring human drive to seek what lies beyond the horizon. The Vikings remind us that history is not just about kings and battles. It is about adventure, survival, and the will to carve meaning into the world. Their sails may be gone, their longships buried in the earth, but their legend still rides the waves of time.